Hello again. Here we are continuing our discussion of paradise. And firstly, I wanted to add that paradise will be, and again, it's my opinion and version of paradise. As you know, if you've watched any of the past videos. But that should go without saying since I'm the one doing the videos, so I can only really speak for myself and my vision of paradise anyway, isn't that right? So continuing on, in my version of paradise, there will be non-duality. Now, we could get into all kinds of discussions about what non-duality means or really is or implies. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm just going to say that from what I've gathered or understood, both intuitively and from teachers, is that non-duality is just as it says. It's not duality. There isn't this constant polarization of dark and light, where if you think of when people are very black and white, and sometimes bluntly so, about this or that being good or evil. So those are the two ends of the spectrum, right? In non-duality, you could kind of go down this thought process. In order to understand what non-duality is, you could sort of start off with, okay, what if we had this perfect balance between the two? So nothing is ever really, really, really bad or really, really good, let's say. Not at the extremes. They're in a perfect balance in the middle. What would that look like? And then from there you could go into the thoughts, ideas that, well, we don't even have to think of it as a balancing between the good and the bad, because there is no such thing anymore. Things just are as they are, and they're not judged in a dualistic way where, I condemn this because it's essentially evil, and I promote that because it's essentially good. People are just free to be as they are, and just freely following their desires and their wishes and so forth, and you just keep going without all this fight between whether something is good or bad. There's no more battles or struggles between dark and light. It's just part of it is just a real common sense plainness, brutal honesty about who we are, where we're at right now, keeping all of that out in the open. And then, in my opinion, you just keep moving up in vibration in your both individual and group frequency. Will just keep getting rapidly higher from there, because it's the struggle, it's the battle between good and evil that keeps us in a lower frequency and vibration. So anyways, that's about all I'm going to say about non-duality right now for this video. But needless to say, my version of paradise will be non-dualistic, and people won't be fighting over, this one's on the dark side and that one's on the light side. Everybody just is as they are, and they're loved deeply as they are and honored. So that takes me to my next point that I wanted to discuss was, in my version of paradise, there will be a very deep consideration of the other, and a balance between that and a very deep consideration of the self. So it might take one to the next thought that, well, where does the self end and the other begin? So let's say in the spirit of oneness, which includes diversity, very much so, there will be a sort of blurred or an indistinct line between the self or the individual self and the other. So it'll be more about the greater self, let's say, kind of like in line with the oversoul idea, or a collective soul, however you want to put it. But there's going to be this blurred line, or rather an indistinct line between the self and the others. So there's, as you consider yourself and your beliefs, your wants, desires, you also consider others, and that's a part of the golden rule, isn't it? But at the same time, there's still going to be boundaries. What we would call healthy boundaries are still going to be in place. So also a part of the golden rule is you have to always, consider, like, is what I'm doing, if what I'm doing is affecting others in some way, is it something that I would feel would be fairly done to myself, or would there be justice, or let's say rightness in such a thing, being if somebody else was doing it and it was affecting me. So anyways, most people, I think, have a pretty good idea of what the golden rule is about, but it's still worth discussing once in a while. So this deep consideration for the others is just in a balance. It doesn't even have to be a thought. It's just an instant thing. It's always there because we think of the whole group as one big self. So there's not this, I don't belong, or separation. There's no separation in a more spiritual, holistic sense. The spirit of this paradigm, or the zeitgeist, is all about wholeness, being holy. And those are, when people like to get into linguistics or semantics and words and what they really mean and the derivatives of words, well, it's worthwhile to look at the word whole and holy and how those two words are related, why they sound so much alike. And you can do this with any words, but we can unpack a language and get gems in it. So it's going to be a very holistic type of world that I'm talking about. And while at the same time, you have your healthy boundaries, and by healthy boundaries, I mean boundaries that aren't just put in place to suppress anything or to put others down or to suppress yourself. You're very conscious, and why those boundaries are there, and excuse me, Other people do as well and understand that they're fair, and they just need to respect them out of a love and respect for the other person. So there's no debate there. Again, whenever we're talking about these kinds of things, people can get into all kinds of discussions about, well, somebody could think that one boundary is healthy and another person not. When we're in, think in terms of a higher dimension, a higher consciousness. So it means everybody that's there has to understand a minimum of, for lack of a better word, truth or principles that are in place in order for the whole thing to hold together, to stay in that dimension. So this is an important part of paradise, and I've mentioned it in past videos, is that you always need to be aware that the whole dimension, the whole world is dependent on everyone maintaining a level of consciousness where there are what are considered undeniable truths or realities that are agreed upon, and so there's no need or room for discussion of, I don't even want to put it that way. There's no, it won't even come up, about, oh, is this person's boundary healthy or whatever, because everybody already instantly knows in there, if somebody is saying this is my boundary, then it just has to be respected, and it will be immediately, and there's no questioning it or anything, because of all these other core foundational truths that are in place, like unconditional love and justice and all those sorts of principles. But it's all going to be just understood, very clearly. And there's no, as I've said before, there's no laws that have to be codified and enforced and all this sort of thing. It's just everybody has their sovereignty, and that is let's say, a core truth and principle, but it's also in the mix of other core truths such as oneness and non-duality and holistic ideas or unity, that sort of thing. So there's this complete unity, and at the same time the individual is respected and revered and so forth. So we're all appreciated for our individual unique diversity of talents and qualities, and then at the same time others revere us. So I would also like to talk about, I mentioned boundaries and how those will be still a part of the reality, but there's no fear involved in this paradise. There's no fear-based institutions. And when you think about, how we go about our lives in this reality that we may say is less than paradise, or perhaps you're already in a paradise, and if we get into monitoring our thoughts and emotions and think about how many times we base an action, an idea on a fear of something. So, yes, there are very I'm not talking about, oh, well, I don't step out into a busy intersection, you know, because I have fear. I think that's more to do with just being smart, or having a survival instinct. I'm not talking about that as fear. I'm talking about, you know, fear is often not rational. It's not reasonable. It doesn't. It's based on something that does not serve us well in the long run. It doesn't. It's not a part of who we really are. And as I said, it's irrational in the sense that often the things that we fear, when it comes right down to it, they're not what we think they are. Or at any rate, when we're basing, if there's something that we want to do, but we won't do it because we're afraid of this or that happening, well, we need to ask ourselves, is that the kind of being or person that we want to be? Do we want to be a person that creates their reality out of fear of, blocking themselves from doing what they really want to do because this or that may happen? So anyways, there's not going to be any of that in my paradise. Everything will be done out of love. There's not going to be all these other emotions and traits, feelings that are related to fear. You might say fear-based, such as anxiety and stress, worry, jealousy, all of that. So you can everyone will be at ease all the time. Now again, that doesn't mean that there's never going to be, decisions that need to be made, or some sort of conflict. Let's say, well, this, my partner wants to do this and I don't want to do it. But there'll always be healthy, very open, honest discussions about things, and because nobody is putting on a mask or hiding behind pretense, and then just doing things out of obligation, or just to please others. It always has to be balanced with, okay, am I doing this because it pleases me and it also pleases the other? Because you are also a part of the whole, just as they are. So if there's something that involves someone else, there always has to be this balance between, okay, yes, we both want to do this. And so none of that will be coming from fear. And then we'll see the result. This is what makes it paradise too. Is that everything around you, is not in place. There's not insurance companies and stuff set up all around, because that would be related to fear, at least on some level, right? I've probably touched enough on that. I would also like to say that someone might ask me, well, Greg, is there going to be any, institutions, organizations, companies, those sorts of things, groups, organized, groups of people with the same goal and working towards that goal to collectively together? And I would say in my paradise that yes, there will be, but they will only form as needed or required for the duration of whatever the shared goal is. And so there'll be this great collaboration and cooperation for, okay, yes, it's a lot of us want to do this and want to experience something together. And so a whole bunch of people, it could be all different sizes of groups, would come together for a temporarily, for a temporal period of time. And so it's not indefinitely. There's a definite period of time. And so as soon as that, let's say, goal or project is completed, now we all experience this, then that group dissolves and goes back to the individuals again that are still a part of this greater whole or community. But for the purpose of fulfilling that project or goal has now been completed, so that group dissolves. And if another goal comes up or project, whatever, soon after, then some of those people could come together, in that group again. I'm not saying that, but there's not going to be these long-standing, organizations that are just sort of like become like an entity on themselves. And then we've seen some of the ills in this society of what that can bring. It's yes, there's good things about that too that can be accomplished with these kinds of organizations, but they're also vulnerable to all kinds of ills and, let's say, evils that are drawn to those types of organizations. It's like an entity that has its own energy and life, say, energy, whatever. It has its own sort of will, and then people can lose their individual will to the will of this entity. Now, we still have something like that, but it's the greater whole, like the whole society, let's say, or the entire collective humanity is what's maintained and never second place to some other group that has come up for whatever the initial purpose was. It doesn't matter. So that's part of why these groups will just dissolve, because it'll dissolve back into this greater collective and whole constantly. So it's like it's working as one body, the whole collective. And yet at the same time, as I said, people are still pursuing their individual experiences and desires and whatnot, but they're also going to be having shared, or want to experience things that others do as well. So that's what would attract people to working together with others. And that could be in like all levels. It could be something that lasts for 2 minutes. Got 10 people come together to make something happen that only takes 10 minutes, or 2 minutes. And then that little group dissolves again, but everybody, this takes me to my next point. There's non-attachment in my paradise. And for starters, I just wanted to mention that in my opinion, and I'm going to use two different words here to illustrate my point, is that, and because people could say they mean the same thing, and that just depends on who's using it and how they define non-attachment. But I like to say non-attachment, not detachment, because I think if you're detached, sometimes that means you're just avoiding something altogether. You're not recognizing that you're still a part of the whole, and um, and then having, like I said, this deep consideration and unconditional love for the other and whatnot. So it it could mean, it doesn't have to necessarily, it depends on how the person is using the word, but um, detachment is not about just running away, being ignorant of um, others, or um, the value in other things and other people and all those kinds of things. There's still this, like I said, very intense love and unconditional love going on in this paradise reality. But there's also unattachment. So that's part of what I was just talking about with the dissolution of organizations and groups, is that when they dissolve, there's no attachment to that group as like, oh, there's no sadness in that. Oh, okay, now that group has come to an end, and what's to become of me now, and all this, because everybody's coming from their strength and their sovereignty and their wholeness. And they recognize that they'll always be a part of the whole, the totality of the community, the whole, all the time anyways. So there's no sadness in these groups, and there'll always be other groups and adventures to have and so forth. So there's no shame or sadness or regret, and that goes for everything. Like, there's relationships where people are together as a couple, and they could be very loving, prosperous relationships. But if for whatever reason those relationships dissolve, it's the same sort of thing. There's no attachment to this other person, where, oh, you're still going to love that person very much, but for whatever reason there's no, let's say, point in the two people staying together in this relationship anymore. But they can leave that coupling very amicably, in a not unattached way, so that, because they know that they're always enough as they are, just as the individual, and they're also an expression of the whole all the time. So people won't get attached to things either in the world, like houses or vehicles or modes of expression or artistic pieces or whatever. It's a very Zen kind of thing, where it's like we create for the pure joy and value in the creation process and creative energy itself. But we're not attached to the creations. The creations come and go. And so it's very much honoring that energy of creation, and just not getting too attached, not getting attached at all to this particular creation, but at the same time having an intense love and honoring of each creation as they are. This could be a difficult or sort of cloudy thing for some people to understand, but when you find that what it really is, when you really feel that and understand how you could have such a deep love but then also be unattached to something, you just know it. It's kind of, I can only explain it so far, but you have to experience it and feel it in order to really understand what I'm getting at. But like I said, it has to do with those ideas of, yes, you love, but at the same time you understand very clearly that there's this expression and that expression, they're all a part of creation. So why get fixated on one particular expression? But as long as there is a let's say utility and in being a part of, let's say, this particular creation or expression, you honor that fully, and at the same time you're not attached to it. You are in non-attachment. You're not going to feel pain by anything ending or beginning. You just see how it's just a part of the whole wheel of life, and how things cycle around, and this whole dance of life that you're in, and seasons in life. And you just see how it's all part of this great masterpiece. And so in a masterpiece you have, different elements going on, but you could say this is a more complex masterpiece than a painting, but there is still, and it's very much it's fluid, right? It's moving and evolving, so it's changing all the time. As soon as you bring in something new, it changes the whole and creates something new. So I think that's about all I wanted to add for this video. I hope that makes sense to you and helps you to form your own ideas and visions of paradise. And I wish you all the best out of life, and joy and peace every day. And we'll continue this discussion in the next video. Thank you.